going to talk about three things in my brief talk. The first is an overview of ECEE's sufficiency work. The second is to briefly talk about the work that my colleague Sarah Darby and I have contributed to that. And the third thing is to reflect a bit on the difference about what it means to us if we start talking about sufficiency rather than efficiency. So ECEEE have got this ongoing sufficiency project, which consists, as has already been mentioned, there's a new website which puts forward the work. And at the moment, there's three packages, three sort of reports that are on there. There's one from Sarah Darby and myself, which is about the conceptual basis for energy efficiency, sufficiency, looking at the big picture. There's work on the rebound effect, and there's also work about sufficiency and appliances. And there's going to be a further report on sufficiency in buildings. And this work's then going to be followed up by ongoing workshops. So I think there's ones in London and Paris are in planning at the moment. This work's been carried out by different research teams across Europe, and it builds on a tradition of work that ECEEE has been sort of gradually building up to getting more interested in going beyond efficiency. And what's cited as the sort of starting point for ECEEE was some work by Hal Wilhite and Jørn Nørgaard back in 2003, I think, a paper there that started this discussion. And there's been various papers and initiatives over the years. There's been a lot of work by all sorts of researchers, not only within the ECEEE confines, of course. And now there's this attempt to bring together different perspectives and see where we get to. And we don't necessarily all agree, all the people who've written about sufficiency for ECEEE, but that kind of, you know, I mean, it was a subject we're trying to open up and get people talking about. If I mention briefly the work that Sarah Darby and I did, as I said, we were trying to take this big picture, so what do we mean when we talk about sufficiency? And we decided to adopt one of the ways we thought about it was looking at this idea of a donut, which is why you've got this rather squashed looking donut picture on here. I didn't bring a presentation, or the one I brought didn't work, so I've got a piece of paper that is actually reused from ECEEE summer study a year and a half ago, so I think that's quite good sufficiency. And it's a diagram that's been developed by a woman called Kate Rayworth, who has written a book called Donut Economics, and what she's trying to do is say, what is the safe space for humanity? That's the inside of the donut. So in her donut diagram, the inner limit is the sort of social foundation. What's the minimum that people need to be healthy, to be safe, to be well fed, and so on. And then the outer boundary is the planetary boundaries, which you've probably all heard of, and the one we probably think about most, of course, is climate change and global emissions, but there's ocean acidification, there's all the other sort of biophysical, ecological boundaries around the edge. And in the centre is what she calls the safe and just space for humanity. So what we have done is say, okay, if that's how you think about everything as a whole, we can adapt that to think about sufficient energy services. So you'll see in the report we've got a sort of little mini version of her donut. And what we've got in our green sort of acceptable space is sufficient energy services. And our definition was that energy sufficiency is a state in which people's basic needs for energy services are met equitably and ecological limits are respected. So now, obviously, you could argue about quite a lot of words in that definition. I mean, you could argue about the whole definition. You could certainly argue about, well, what do you mean by basic needs? What's the difference between needs and wants? Is there a difference? I mean, that's a big debate that people like to have. What do you mean by met equitably? Whose equity are we talking about? Who's going to decide how we do these things? And in our paper, we look at some of those issues and try to think about what does it mean. But we're just at the start of thinking about that. And how you would turn that into something operational. And that's different, for example, from the work done by Edouard Toulouse and Sophie Attali, which looks at more specific sort of sufficiency actions, you might say, to do with things you could put into policy right now. So those are the sorts of things we were thinking about. And I think the move to starting to talk about energy sufficiency rather than efficiency is quite a tricky one in a way, because efficiency is quite safe. I mean, it can meet all sorts of objectives. It can meet energy security, it can meet green growth and economic growth, it can meet reducing fuel poverty, it can you know, it can deliver competitiveness. It doesn't matter, in a sense, what the political agenda of the moment is. Efficiency can do it, right? I mean, that's what we've all been saying for decades. And then if you move on to sufficiency, suddenly you're actually explicitly having to talk about the end and not just the means. Efficiency can be a means to get you lots of different things. Energy sufficiency, you're starting off by saying, so what are we all up to? What are we trying to create here in terms of the human quality of life and what we're all doing, and in terms of protecting our planetary environment that we all need. And so it's kind of, yeah, it's explicitly talking about values. It can be seen as very political. It can be quite contested. And it's a little bit difficult perhaps for us as experts to walk away from just going, well, I'm just neutral, I'm just giving you information, these are a good set of arguments. Now we're saying, actually, this is what I believe, and this is where I think we need to get to. So that can be perhaps a bit difficult for all of us, and we need to think about how we're going to present that and how we're going to work with it to communicate to people who may have different sets of values, but nevertheless are living on the same planet as the rest of us and have to recognise these boundaries, and whose countries will have signed up to the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which is what the sort of inner boundary of the donut is all about. So I think there's, you know, clearly there's ways forwards with this, but we probably need to have a lot of discussions and debates about it as a community. And it's probably about being braver, and it's about being bolder, and having seen all these IEA projections, sorry Kevin, but I mean, God, aren't they depressing? I mean, if that's the best we can do, you know, that's nowhere near good enough, right? So we've got to think of something else, and sufficiency can be part of that. You know, as can engaging with people's values, as can engaging with people, rather than just technologies. But we you know, we need more things, we need more ways to solve this, because that's, you know, that's just not going to get us anywhere near 2 degrees or 1.5 degrees, as far as I can see. We need to do more. And I want just to finish with a small, I don't know, anecdote. I was, the other day I was sort of, I don't know, I'd spent a day at work, and on the one hand I was writing something about building insulation, blah, blah, you know, usual sort of stuff. And then on the other hand, I was looking at the news, and there's this new protest movement called Extinction Rebellion in London, and they've been stopping the traffic, and it's not just in Britain, actually, it's becoming worldwide. And they've been doing all sorts of things, including gluing themselves to the offices of our Department of Business and Energy. And I was speaking to my husband, and I was saying, oh, you know, these people, they're out there, they're, you know, really protesting, really making a difference. And I'm sitting in an office, you know, typing. And he looked at me and he said, yeah, but, you know, can you really go around supergluing yourself to a potential funder? And I thought, well, can I? So that's the challenge for all of you. Are we going to superglue ourselves to the funder? Is that what sufficiency is? Is it superglue, or is it something less radical than that?
Thank you.